the head grifter. You think he's going to be indicted because of the case here in Georgia? This is probably the case put together by the prosecutor here in Fulton County. The case that puts the orange vomit at most risk because the evidence is, what do they call it, prima facie evidence? His phone call to the Secretary of State. Huh? Fani Willis, who's the district attorney of Fulton County, has been working on this for some time now. And D.A. Willis is not messing around. She isn't. She took this case and impaneled this special grand jury because what Miss Willis is trying to do is to bring this filthy, grifting bastard Donald Trump to justice. He tried to get the Secretary of State in Georgia to commit several felonies so that Trump would not be kicked to the curb as far as his term as, quote, president, end quote. And the evidence is there. Now, a few weeks after losing the 2020 election, Trump also called Ronna McDaniel, who at the time was the head of the Republican National Committee, and he had a plan for her. She's a good Mormon, by the way. He had a plan for her for keeping him in office. And during that call, he asked John Eastman, another filthy, traitorous bastard, who was the architect, even though he was a law professor, an architect of the strategy to defy the will of the American people and keep the orange vomit in office. And the plot was, well, Trump supporters in the states that the bastard had lost would act as if they were official electoral college delegates, which was a just incredibly blatant scheme to try to bypass the will of the voters. Now, white racists have been doing this forever. Look at what black folk have had to suffer since the Emancipation Proclamation, since the end, so-called, of the Civil War. Look what black folk have had to deal with. Scheme after scheme, some of them violent, some of them bloody and murderous, to prevent people, black people, from voting. Well, this time, Trump and the filth around him came up with an idea to keep white people from voting. Oh, Lord, have mercy. Going to keep white people from voting? Oh, Mr. Trump. That's not going to play. Keeping black people from voting in this country, historically, that's been a yawner. Oh, what? There's something going on in Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, Texas. What? Well, let's let the states work that out. But white people? Oh, boy. And after this plan by Eastman and Trump was put into motion, Ronna McDaniel forwarded what she called an electoral recap report to Trump's executive assistant. The plan, the plot from Ronna McDaniel, who should be put in prison too for conspiring with these bastards. And Trump's executive assistant replied to Ronna McDaniel this way, quote, "It's in front of him," end quote. Now, these details come from the report released in December by the House committee that investigated this filthy bastard and what he tried to do. And the investigation shows that Trump, the orange vomit, was not on the periphery of all this effort to overturn the election results, especially not here in Georgia. Here in Georgia, this ugly bastard was at the center of it. All right, I'm talking about the possibility of the grifter Donald Trump, the disgraced bum Donald Trump being indicted as a result of the grand jury investigation into his attempt to tamper with the election results here in Georgia. As you probably know, for the past 2 years, prosecutors here have been conducting this criminal investigation into, well, this is kind of funny, but into whether the Trump and his collection of criminals interfered in the election here in Georgia. Now, this inquiry, and it's covered an awful lot of ground here by the Fulton County, which is mostly Atlanta, the Fulton County District Attorney. It's a wide-ranging inquiry, and it's now entering the indictment phase. And the central question right now is whether or not the orange vomit will face criminal charges. Boy, talk about fingers crossed. Mine. Now, the legal analysts who are looking at this, because after all, it is, I mean, let's face it, it is an ex-president. That's the title of Trump that he goes under. I'm an ex-president, although he would never say ex, but he's still a grifting son of a bitch who corrupted or tried to corrupt the laws of this country. Legal analysts who have been following this case say there are two primary areas of considerable risk for this bastard. As reported by the New York Times, the first area are the calls that he made to state officials here, including one to Brad Raffensperger, who is the Secretary of State. He got reelected here back in November. And you remember that's when the bastard Trump said that Raffensperger needed to find 11,780 votes. But the January 6th committee, who conducted the year-long investigation of this crime, they recently released their transcripts, and the transcripts show other areas of potential legal jeopardy for the orange bastard. For example, there was his direct involvement in recruiting an entire slate of phony presidential electors in this state in the weeks after he lost the election. And the Atlanta prosecutors have moved a lot more quickly than the Department of Justice, and that's understandable. The Department of Justice now has a special counsel, Jack Smith, and he was recently appointed to oversee the Trump-related investigations, but not this one, because this one has to do with violation of Georgia law. Now, this month, January, the Fulton County Superior Court, where Fani Willis works, disbanded that special grand jury after the grand jury produced an investigative report on the case. And that concludes months of private testimony from all sorts of Trump allies, state officials, and other witnesses. It's all put together now in this case being built by Fani Willis, I should say. Now, the report is still secret. It's grand jury work. And a hearing is scheduled for tomorrow, Tuesday, to determine if any or all of it will be made public. Now, according to what has been revealed, almost 20 people are known to have been named as targets of this investigation, and they could face charges, including Rudy the Bat Giuliani and the Orange Vomit's former personal lawyer. He's had dozens of them. This hapless bastard is named David Schaefer. Giuliani. Excuse me. It's hard to keep the criminals separate. Giuliani was Trump's former personal lawyer. And then there's David Schaefer, who is the head of the Georgia Republican Party. Well, maybe not for long, eh, David? Now, if Fani Willis decides to make her case to a regular grand jury, that's what will be necessary if she seeks indictments. And they wouldn't come, if they come at all, not until May. So what's going to be released tomorrow is the result, part of it, maybe, perhaps, maybe none of it. But Fani Willis has the results of what the grand jury has decided. The immediate threat to Trump comes from Fani Willis, Atlanta Area District Attorney, and she's been investigating whether this bum and his allies interfered in the 2020 election in Georgia. And the case, as I've said before, and other people have said, this could be one of the most perilous legal problems for Trump. So here's some of the things we know. Prosecutors in Georgia opened their investigation in February 2021, just weeks after Trump made that phone call to the Georgia Secretary of State, telling him to find enough votes to overturn the results of the election here. So what have they been looking at under Fani Willis's direction? Well, in addition to Trump's call to our Secretary of State, Ms. Willis focused on a plot by Trump allies to send these fake Georgia electors to Washington to do their dirty work, and also lies about the election results made before the state legislature, made in front of the state legislature by Rudy the Bat. And Giuliani is the one who spearheaded efforts to keep Trump in power because Rudy the Bat was the Orange Vomit's personal lawyer at the time. Also, there is a tangential investigation in Coffee County, Georgia. It's referred to as an election data breach. That's part of the investigation. This is, you probably saw the videos. This is where Giuliani's team was invited into an election center by the election supervisor in Coffee County, or an election, I don't know if she was a supervisor, I assume so, to take a look at how the election results could be miscounted, deformed. I mean, it's just the most blatant example, and this was all on video, most blatant example of what these bums are trying to do. So, who has been under scrutiny in this investigation? Well, Rudy the Bat, he's been told that he's a target of the investigation. And prosecutors have warned some so-called Republican state officials here and some of these so-called Trump alternate electors that they too could be indicted. These people knew what they were doing. These citizens of Georgia, these rancid son of a bitches were willing, able, and participated in a plot to deny their fellow citizens in this state the representation in the office of the presidency that the voters in this state decided we wanted. So these dumb shit electors who are just, common folk, their asses may be in a sling too. God, I hope so. I hope so. And then we have Graham Cracker, Lindsey Graham Cracker, the senator of South Carolina, who had been fighting efforts to force him to testify before a grand jury, but he finally had to testify. Now, the potential charges, according to experts, that the DA, Ms. Willis, appears to be building is a case that could target multiple defendants with charges of conspiracy. Once you add that charge, it's a whole different ballgame in terms of if a conviction is obtained, what the sentence will be. But conspiracy to commit election fraud or racketeering-related charges like the RICO Act for engaging in a coordinated scheme to undermine the election. This is some serious shit. And this is a reason that so many people who've been following this local case here in Georgia the pundits on television, the experts, have said this is the case that could put the Orange Vama and the rest of these scum behind bars. Truth seekers, I am here to tell you that these are all very serious charges. I hope that our district attorney here, Fani Willis, can put this son of a bitch, all of them, away for whatever period of time the law allows. But I hope it's a very, very long time. Hi, Truth Seekers. Mike Malloy here. The Progressive Voices Network brings you commercial-free commentary from today's leading progressive radio hosts and pundits, like me, Mike Malloy, 24 hours a day. I'm not your typical old guy from the 80s or the 90s talk radio host, and Progressive Voices is not your typical talk radio network. It's a listener-supported nonprofit with no corporate control whatsoever over our broadcast. So hosts like me, Mike Malloy, are free to rant and scream and carry on about whatever we like. We're often controversial, but we're never boring. Weeknights, 9 p.m. in the East, 6 p.m. in the West on the Progressive Voices Network. Always progressive, always on. I'm Mike Malloy. Keep it lit.